Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today. It's an original tag that I was tagged in by its creator, and it's an epic. It's an appointment tag for BookTube. It's the latest foodie book tag from Josh at Literary Gladiators. This is the 21st foodie book tag, and at long last, the foodie book tags have gone around to donuts. This is the donut book tag. So it's just the usual thing. It's a dozen or more great prompts, and you're not supposed to really overthink it much. Instead, just go with with examples that come to mind and think about them a bit. So I did. So I thought we'd start off with prompt number 1, which is classic. A classic book that you feel everybody needs to read. And right out of the bat, I'm not sure that I understand what's being talked about here. Classic would surely mean a plain donut, right? And I don't understand why anyone would eat a plain donut. so I don't know that a plain or classic donut is something that everybody should try. But in terms of a classic that everybody should read, well, we've already been over it on this channel. In fact, we had a mandatory read-along of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I would stand by that. No matter what you think, no matter where your tastes lie, take a day and read Pride and Prejudice. Prompt number 2 is Vanilla Frosted. And the prompt is a simple but engaging work. Naturally, I'm gonna recommend Meg here by Steve Alton. His thin, in every conceivable use of that word, novel about a giant phosphorescent prehistoric killer shark on the loose in the present day. It's quite a lot of innocent fun. Prompt number 3, Chocolate Frosted. Your second favorite work from your favorite writer. So I guess Chocolate Frosted is second favorite to Vanilla Frosted. I guess, is that true with you? If you went into a donut shop and you had a choice, Vanilla Frosted or Chocolate Frosted, it would always be that you would pick Vanilla Frosted first. But anyway, my favorite author, I don't harp on this, and I don't usually go into him much, and that is Erasmus, the Dutch humanist Erasmus. And of course, my favorite work by him is The Praise of Folly. But if I have to pick a secondary works by him that I also really like, he wrote a series of commentaries on the New Testament that are really good, and that are usually linked with his translations of the New Testament. I think there's a great, really interesting volume to be written of his New Testament writings, with lots of footnotes and a great introduction. What I wouldn't give to see that. He's a very engaging writer, and the last book that he ever wrote is 1,000 pages long. No one's ever heard of it. And it wasn't incomplete when he died, but I would take a translation of that as well. I wish there were more. Erasmus is an extremely engaging writer. Extremely engaging. If you get the right translation, if you get the right translator, you're set up with the right notes, you will see why he was such a runaway best-selling author in his own day. A huge percentage of the books that were sold at any book fair were Erasmus books. A huge percent of the books that anybody read were Erasmus books. And there's a reason for that, and it isn't all Praise of Folly. It isn't all the adages or the colloquies. A lot of his religious writing is intensely good. I would love to see that, so I'm going to go with that. The Paracelsus or the Ratio or whatever religious writings of Erasmus that you want to use that are not, for instance, the Handbook of a Christian Prince or anything like that. I'm talking about specific scriptural commentaries, or his great last book, which was all about preaching. It was all about talking about the Gospels to an audience, both of believers and non-believers. What to do, what not to do, how it works, what things to say, what things to think about. Just more Erasmus would be good. Let's see here. Prompt number 4 is Strawberry Frosted. And that is a lesser-known work from a known author that you think should be studied more. And I'm going to cheat a little here, because all the works of this author are lesser known. but I'm going to use it as an occasion to wish that this author were just plain better known, and that is Martha Gellhorn, who unfortunately is known today mostly as one of Ernest Hemingway's wives. And that's a bitter, bitter injustice. And it's made all the worse by the fact that it was a bitter injustice that was orchestrated by Ernest Hemingway. Martha Gellhorn was a boots-on-the-ground journalist. She was a brilliant fiction writer. She was a fantastic letter writer. She was an opinionated and very wise and often prescient voice in the publishing industry of her own day. In other words, she was better than Hemingway at everything that Hemingway did, and he knew it. And no matter what kind of a face he was putting on the world, and no matter what he might have been writing privately to a couple of friends, he worked assiduously to torpedo her career. He hated F. Scott Fitzgerald's career as well, whenever there was talk about Fitzgerald being his literary equal or his literary superior. He couldn't stand stuff like that at all. It's an aspect of Hemingway that naturally the burnishing of his reputation by his fans and literary executors has just worked that right out of the legend. But actually, he was incredibly petty and incredibly effective, and no one was the subject of more of that campaign on his part than Martha Gellhorn. So, although, any literate person anywhere in America, any book lover anywhere in America, can rattle off 3 or 4, at least, works by Ernest Hemingway, those same people would be hard-pressed to name even one thing that Martha Gellhorn wrote. She wrote better novels than Hemingway and more of them, and her journalism is also fantastic, much better than Hemingway's. And also the burgeoning magazine market of her day, where you could write big features on ideas or particular rituals or celebrity profiles or anything like that. It was good money. You could make enough for a month on one of those things, and there were many venues where you could sell them. She was better at that than Hemingway. Better at deadlines because she wasn't a blackout alcoholic. Better at everything than he was, and he couldn't stand that. Absolutely hated it. So I would recommend, I think it's an absolute crime that there are so many reprints of so much Hemingway and not Gellhorn. We ought to be talking about her in the same breath that we talk about Fitzgerald and Hemingway, and we don't. Her standout novels, she wrote probably 5 really good novels. I'd say of those 5, probably 2 are utterly brilliant. As far as I know, they're not currently in print. They're certainly not in a Penguin Classic or Everyman Classic or anything like that, and they should be. People in bookstores should not only have access to those books, they should have multiple editions to choose from, like they do with all the other great works of American literature, but not her. Also, her reportage. There have been volume reprints. There should be more. There should always be some new celebration of her as a writer, and that's to say nothing of her book reviews, which don't get covered even in the occasional academic reprint of her nonfiction. That's not even talking about them. What I wouldn't give for that as well. My strawberry frosted donut is going to be Martha Gellhorn. I would like to see her positioned in the active pantheon of American literature. None of this, every 25 years somebody comes out with a selected letters volume and every literary person talks about it, and then she's gone for another 25 years. None of that. We don't go through that with Fitzgerald or Hemingway. Let's not go through it with her either. Let's stop with that and put her where she belongs. But that would be that should be one of my only rants for this tag. Number 5 is Glazed, a glazed donut, and this is a writer who immediately immerses you. And the first name that came to mind is Sei Shonagon, who wrote 1,000 years ago. She wrote at the same time as Murasaki Shikibu wrote The Tale of Genji. And Genji is an enormous work and immersive in its own way, but tough, steep, complicated, not easily resolvable. A work that's worthy of grappling your whole life with. Whereas Sei Shonagon did not write a book like that. She wrote a book called The Pillow Book, which is one of the most frivolous, most endearing, immersively frivolous books that I know of. That's just her chattering, basically, just writing down the chatter of her and her lady friends at court about, here are 3 amusing things about what happens if a dog comes in from the rain. Or here's why toads are gross. or here are 10 things that the cook does that we find amusing. And she just decided to write all these things down, and they're adorable. It's an adorable book. Once you start reading it and realize, oh my, all right, this isn't exactly high literature, you'll just keep reading. It's just, you'll be amazed at how enjoyable it is. So let's next here. Prompt number 6 is a Jelly Doughnut, a work that contained more than you expected. I had occasion to realize this about a series of books just recently. I think it was just late last year that I found a Phoebe Atwood-Taylor novel starring A.C. Mayo, her sort of jack-of-all-trades crime solver on Cape Cod. These are novels from a century ago. and or almost a century ago. And I found one, I think late last year, and then I went out and found a bunch of others, and realized how long it had been since I read them, since I read any Phoebe Atwood-Taylor. It used to be once upon a time, if you spent any summer at Cape Cod, no matter what house you rented or no matter what your renters brought into the house you owned, you couldn't go anywhere without finding a whole shelf of her Cape Cod novels. I don't think that's true anymore. I think she's largely gone. I don't think she's reprinted anymore. And I had just a frozen memory of the A.C. Mayo books as being, just sort of old color Cape Cod novels with fairly easy mysteries and done with a lot of energy and a fair amount of deadpan New England humor. And rereading a bunch of them, I didn't reread them all by any means. I would love to find, they used to be in a uniform white spine mass market paperback edition. I'd love to find the whole shelf of them and just read them all. But I read a bunch of them. I read 3 or 4 and was really struck by what they were. They are a lot more than just what I just described. They're a sociological portrait of a vanished Cape Cod. And a lot of the humor and also the interaction between characters is a lot more multi-leveled than I caught on. These things can definitely be popped down like popcorn when you're on vacation. I don't think people do that anymore, unfortunately. I don't think, unless you go book shopping at used bookstores on the Cape, I don't know that you'd ever encounter this author. But they can definitely be read that way, but boy, oh boy, I thought there was a lot more to them than that this time around. So that was a surprise. That definitely wins here. Question number 7 is a bit of a problem. Not for the prompt. The prompt is Boston cream. Boston cream pie is a miracle that God gave to the world. No, it's the prompt. It's a scholarly work that you would recommend to a casual reader. And by scholarly work, I assume we mean something that's, first of all, nonfiction, and that's footnoted and endnoted, has an extensive bibliography, is working in original languages if it's dealing with something that's not written in English, and that's dealing with the primary and secondary scholarship. In other words, a serious monograph or a serious history on a scholarly subject. And the simple truth is, I wouldn't give a work like that to a casual reader. Those books are not for casual readers. Now, I know in the 21st century, in 2019, that sounds just unbearably elitist, but that's the simple truth. Even in 2019, words and realities still obtain. And a scholarly work is, by its very definition, a work that is not for a casual reader. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being a casual reader, but if you're a casual reader who is interested in the First Punic War, I will recommend you books on the First Punic War. Absolutely, I will. I'll be right there with you all the way. But I won't recommend a scholarly work on the subject, because a scholarly work isn't written for someone who is just now learning about the First Punic War. And so huge chunks of it would be tooth-crackingly inaccessible to a casual reader. So I don't agree with the premise of the question, so I'm just going to move right on. Question number 8 is Cruller, a work that makes you think of France. No idea what was going through Joss's mind to associate the Cruller with France. But one way or another, when it comes to the answer to this question, it's actually very similar to the A.C. Mayo stories, to the Phoebe Atwood-Taylor, and that is Georges Simenon, whose Maigret novels have been for a couple of years now getting a new translation, a very nice uniform edition from Penguin. And boy, oh boy, they're in new translations, so a lot of the creakiness of the original translations is either removed or replaced with new creakiness, one way or another. They totally capture the France of mid-20th century. They totally capture it. In fact, in a much more extensive way, right down to slang and newspaper headlines, than I remembered when I read them the first time. So, and like the Phoebe Atwood-Taylor, there's a lot more going on in those books than I originally credited. I was willing, for a long time, when I read the first English translations years and years and years ago, also in a uniform mass market set, I was willing to write them off because I already knew from reading biographies of Simenon that sometimes a whole book he could do in one afternoon, in one weekend. And I thought, how much can there be in these things if that's how fast they were written? But he packed a lot in. He was obviously a very erudite guy, apparently not a very nice guy, but there's a lot in these books, a lot more than just the whodunit, than just which person actually did the crime and how they got away with it for the little time that they did until Maigret catches up with them. So I'm going to use that. That makes me think of France, definitely, but I also wanted to second it as a recommendation to try these new translations. They're not just beautifully done. They are beautifully done. They're beautifully produced. But they're also really, really good, and refreshingly totally free of notes of any kind. You just plunked right into the book. Let's see here. Prompt number 9 is Powdered Sugar, a work that left you with evident emotions. I don't quite know what evident emotions means. If it's Did I Bawl? That has only happened in 2 books that I've ever read, so that's too rare to talk about. But in terms of a strong emotional reaction, I did have one in mind. It's by Vita Sackville-West, and it's Noel and the Sackvilles, her nonfiction book about this sprawling English country home that had been in her family for centuries. And she wrote, Noel and the Sackvilles is a very touching, beautifully written book about the history of that house and the people who lived in it and the portraits on the walls and the different rooms and beds and the meditations on all of it. And the thing that caused the evident emotions in me is there's a note of, I won't call it pining, and it isn't actually bitterness either. I'm actually not sure that there is a precise word in English for the complex emotion that is evoked by the end of the book. But it centers around the fact that Noel would have been Vita Sackville-West if she had been a man. It could, according to family custom, it could only be passed on to a male heir. So the whole time that she was growing up loving the place and knowing all about it and writing this book, she knew that it wasn't going to be hers, and that if she had been born a man, it would have been. And that, by the time you're done at the end of the book, you are convinced of 2 things. One, that this is an incredible inheritance, an amazing, amazing living thing, a living entity of a place. And 2, that it's an unbelievably stupid tragedy that it didn't go to her. So I'm going to use that as my example, and also, once again, like on most of these other answers of mine, as an occasion to recommend the book to you if you see it. Then prompt number 10 is Cider, and that is perfect for reading in front of a fire in the autumn. And for me, that would be any of the novels of Jonathan Franzen, because you could read the first crappy, bloated, self-indulgent, self-important, condescending sentence on each page, and then tear the page out and toss it into the fire. You wouldn't need to get up from underneath your blanket to add to the fire. You could keep it going for 700 pages of crap. Then prompt number 11 is Doughnut Hole, a collection of short, accessible works or sections. And I have something in mind that is there. It's a series of short, accessible works that are composed of sections. I don't think they're in print anymore, at least the original generation of them aren't, but they were the old Oxford books. The Oxford Book of Death, the Oxford Book of Aphorisms, the Oxford Book of the Sea, the Oxford Book of Adventure Stories, stuff like that, the Oxford Book of Historical Detectives. The original generation of those Oxford books, the series still goes on, I'm pretty sure, but the original generation of them, probably the first 20 or 25, are marvelous anthologies, just marvelous, that I strongly recommend. You will get at least a solid dozen recommendations of writers or books that you will want to follow up with upon reading each one of them. So the next time you're at a flea market or yard sale or used bookstore and you see one of those things, the Oxford Book of Royal Anecdotes, the Oxford Book of Friendship, whatever it is, even if you think you're not interested in the subject, get the anthology for 50 cents or whatever and read through it. You'll be amazed. The original 20 or 25 in that series are treasure troves. And then let's see here. Prompt number 12 is Raspberry Frosted, a book that you would recommend to Homer Simpson. And Homer Simpson is an idiot who doesn't read, so I wouldn't recommend a book to him. I wouldn't. There's no such thing as a book that saves people. The reader has to meet the book halfway, so I wouldn't do it. I'm going to skip this one just like I did the scholarly work recommended to a casual reader. Then 13 is What is your favorite kind of donut? And that is Boston cream pie. In fact, on National Doughnut Day, I went to Dunkin' Donuts and got a Boston cream pie. They are absolutely delicious. You've got your fried lard, and then you've got a coating of fake chocolate, and at the center of the Boston cream pie is petroleum jelly of some kind or other that is almost certainly carcinogenous. And you put those 3 things together and you get something delectable. Just delectable. Now, I remember when Dunkin' Donuts, of course, is a product of the times, and they are cost-cutting whenever they can. So your memories of Dunkin' Donuts, if you're in America and you're fond of American fast food, your memories of Dunkin' Donuts will change over time. I remember the first Dunkin' Donuts Boston cream pies that I ate. They were very different than the ones you have today. They were almost twice as big. The chocolate frosting was thick and crinkly. The cream was on the inside was much tastier, much more liquid. That has changed now to the point where they're just Pongo sponges. but once upon a time, and even now, they're still delectable. And then prompt number 14 is time to make the donuts, which was forever and ever the slogan of Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts is not even Dunkin' Donuts anymore, it's Dunkin'. But for forever and ever, it was Dunkin' Donuts, and there was, they got, for a while there, they had a classic commercial actor who was, he played this bit part of the Dunkin' Donuts baker who had to get up at 3 in the morning because you got to be making the donuts for the shop to open at 6 or whenever they open. The Dunkin' Donuts on my corner is doing a booming business at 6 in the morning. People headed to work, getting coffee and a donut or some ice cream or a sandwich of some kind. And that was the joke on this line of commercials. They were hilarious. I loved seeing them whenever they appeared. It was him, and there was the Don't Squeeze the Charmin guy, and it was the Maytag repairman who was really lonely because Maytags don't need repair. So he was the Maytag repairman, but he never got called to do anything. And in addition to that, there was the Dunkin' Donuts guy who would wake up half asleep in the middle of the night. Time to make the donuts. And that is Who Do You Tag? And I want to tag Brian at Bookish, my collaborator, for a read-along in July. I want to tag Joe, the retired book nerd, and Sue at Sue's Book Nook. No, I also want to hear from the Americans that I tag. I want to hear what your proximity is to Dunkin' Donuts. You're not in Massachusetts, so of course you won't have a Dunkin' Donuts. In Massachusetts, it's law in the state that there has to be a Dunkin' Donuts every 25 feet. So you're not there, so you might have to travel a bit to get to your nearest Dunkin' Donuts, but I'd still like to hear what they're like and if there is one nearby. And also, of course, Britta, who I'm not 100% sure of this, but she may never have patronized a Dunkin' Donuts in her entire life. I don't think Dunkin' Donuts exists in Europe. I don't know how they get along. but anyway, that is the donut book tag. I want to thank Josh for tagging me, of course. I'm very happy because I seem to get tagged in every foodie book tag, even though, to put it mildly, I am not a foodie. I demonstrated that with Frida on the sidewalk just today. But I'll spare you the gory details. It's kind of gross. You humans are so delicate when it comes to what you eat. But anyway, I had a blast on the donut book tag at last. So let's move on to the next one. Can't wait to see what it is. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.